Hey sewing friends! Welcome back to my channel. Lydia here. I make sewing tutorials and PDF patterns for any of you who don't know, and today I'm very excited to present to you the Lark frock. This dress has been a long time in the works. You guys have been asking for it and it is finally here. This dress is so great. I've gotten so much wear out of it this summer. It's just such a great dress to throw on and it's just gorgeous. So without further ado, let's get started. Today we are making the lovely Lark frock. The Lark frock pattern features 2 lengths and 2 different sleeves. I will be showing both sleeve assemblies today. Please read through the read first file to help with printing, sizing, materials, adjustments, and cutting layouts. Also have photo instructions. Now let's sew. Overlock all the pieces according to my guide. A lot of the seams will be overlocked later during the construction process. For the bishop sleeve only, pre-fold the sleeve hem binding. So you're going to fold in half lengthwise and then fold one side into the center fold. And we are folding into the wrong side of the fabric and just pressing everything in place. Using an 18mm bias tape maker, fold and iron the waist ties and neck ties, then fold this in half and press again to completely enclose the raw edges. Fold in the raw edges of both ends of the ties, then sew along the folded edges. As you can see, I'm putting a piece of paper underneath at the start to get it going with a backstitch, and then when I come near the end, I add paper again. Just trust me, this works wonders. You'll see what I mean if you try without the paper. Fold the button loop right sides together and sew 1/2 inch or 13mm from the edge. You should now trim the seam allowance down to 1/8 or 3mm, but as you can see, I went right ahead and tried to turn it out. So I snipped into the tube 1/2 inch or 13mm from the end of the strip and used a bobby pin to hook around the end and pass through the tube. And if you do it right, you will have already trimmed the excess seam allowance, but I trimmed it now. Once you turn it out, you can cut off the jagged ends and you will have more than enough to work with later on for your button loop. At the neckline of both the lining and main of the front top bodice, fold the tie opening back in on itself at the notches and pin in place. And this is with the wrong side facing up and it's getting folded into the wrong side. Place the lining and the main, which are exactly the same, right sides together at the neckline and sew along the neckline. Then trim the seam allowance and clip the curve. Understitch with the seams toward the lining. With the right sides together again, pin up the keyhole curve. Then you're going to sew this seam. Trim the seam allowance and then understitch with seams towards the facing. Stop the understitch approximately 2 inches or 5 centimeters from the top opening. Make sure your understitch is on the same side as your neckline understitch. Turn right sides out and press. Create the channel for the tie by sewing 1/2 inch in from the edge around the keyhole curve. Next, using a safety pin, feed the necktie through the channel you just created. Without pulling or gathering the keyhole, pull the ties until they are at even lengths. On the front skirt, fold your darts together and pin them in place. And then sew them and tie off the threads at the end of the dart point. Then press the darts towards the center of the skirt. Sew a double row of gathering stitches along the bottom of the top front bodice between the two outermost notches. You should be sewing through both the facing and the main of the front bodice. Match all the notches of the skirt to the bodice and pin at each notch. Gather in between notches on both sides to match the width of the skirt. Sew with right sides together and then finish the raw edges using an overlocker or a zigzag stitch. Top stitch with the seams toward the skirt and press. Place the back facing to the main back with right sides together and sew along the neckline curve. Then trim the seam allowance and understitch with seams towards the facing. And now it's time to add the button loop. So first, wrap your button loop around your button just to make sure that your loop will be big enough to fit it. Then pin the button loop at the notches of the back neck, making sure the loop area that you need for the button is beyond the 1/2 inch seam allowance. Then with right sides together, sew the keyhole opening in the center back, securing the button loop in place on the one side. Stop and back stitch at the upper zipper notch, as in your last stitch does not go beyond that notch. Trim that seam allowance and turn out and press. With right sides of the back dress together, sew from the hem to the lower zipper notch. Then press this open. Now you're going to apply this invisible zipper. You want to line up the top nib of the zipper teeth with the upper zipper notch. You will need to fold the top zipper tape back for it to line up with the upper zipper notch. Pin one side of the unzipped zipper to the right side of the back seam. Sew with an invisible zipper foot until you get to the center back seam, and sew as close as you can to that seam without sewing over it. Zip up the zipper and mark the waist and lower notch location with a piece of chalk. Then unzip and attach the other side of the zipper to the other side of the back seam, matching the markings to the notches, and then sew in place, and you want it as close to the seam as possible. Flip the zipper end inside. And then pull the zipper tab through from the right side. You can secure the leftover zipper tail to the seam allowance to keep it from flapping around. I actually didn't do this, but it's definitely a good idea. Flip out the zipper seam allowance in the facing area and pin right sides together to the back facing. Sew along the zipper and then turn out and press. Next, you're going to mark the placement of your button through the button loop on the opposite side of the back dress, and then you can hand sew your button in place. It is now time to sew up the shoulders. So attach the front and back at the shoulder seams with the main and the facing/lining open and flat and matching together with the neckline seam matching in the center. Press these seams open first once you've sewn them. Then fold the facing to the inside and press flat. Finish the raw edges of the armhole using an overlocker or zigzag stitch through both layers. On the back dress, pin the waist ties in place at the waist notches on the side seams. And then you're going to match your side seams right sides together, front and back, and sew them together, and then press them open. Press up the hem a ½ inch all around, and then take it to the sewing machine, and you can fold it up another ½ inch as you sew. It will leave you with this beautiful clean hem, and you can press it again. To assemble the bishop sleeves, you are going to sew a double gathering stitch along the bottom hem of the sleeve, and then you're going to gather this area to match the length of the hem binding piece on both pieces. Make sure that your pieces are mirrored. With right sides together, pin the unfolded side of the sleeve binding to the gathered sleeve hem and sew together. Then trim the seam allowance. Sew a single gathering stitch between the sleeve cap front and back notches, then just gather slightly. This is not to create gathers, but rather to help ease in the cap of the sleeve. Then sew the side seam of the sleeve, including the sleeve binding. Make sure that it's unfolded when you sew it. Press this side seam open and then repress the binding folds. Fold in the sleeve binding, lining up the fold just past the original stitch and pin in place. Top stitch on the right side of the binding, making sure to catch the inner binding fold as you sew. It's now ready to sew to the dress, but first I'm going to show you how to assemble the cap sleeve, as the sleeve to armhole assembly is the same for both sleeves. So take your cap sleeves and place them right sides together in pairs. Make sure that these are going to end up mirrored. And just a reminder, the back notch is always the double notch. With the right sides together, sew the sleeve main to the sleeve lining along the hem. Trim the seam allowance and understitch with seams towards the lining. Make sure that your sleeves are mirrored opposites. Sew the side seam of the sleeve with the right sides of the main together and the right sides of the lining together with the seam matching in the center. Press these seams open, then fold the lining to the inside and press. Finish the raw edges of the sleeve opening using an overlocker or zigzag stitch, securing the lining to the main. Sew a single gathering stitch between the sleeve cap notches, and then gather slightly. And as I mentioned before, this is not to create gathers, but rather to help ease in the cap of the sleeve. The sew line, as you can see here, should be pucker free. As mentioned, the sleeve to armhole assembly is the same for both sleeves, so I'm going to sew the cap sleeve to this dress. Line up the sleeve side seams to the dress side seams, the front and back notches, and the shoulder notch to the shoulder seam, and pin in place. Adjust the gathers if needed along the sleeve cap to match the rest of the sleeve. Then sew the sleeve seam and make sure you don't have any puckers in the sleeve cap. And just a tip, you can sew with your free arm and the sleeve can face the machine bed as the feed dogs will help ease in the sleeve cap and reduce the likelihood of puckers. And that is the Lark frock completed. Congratulations! Please do share it with me, tag me at Lydia Naomi Studio and hashtag Lark frock. And also like this video and subscribe to my channel if you want to see more. Thank you so much for watching.